Imagine a snowy Christmas Eve in New York, where a single moment changes everything. "Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" asked the little girl. The millionaire single dad took her home on Christmas Eve. Snowflakes drifted gently through the air, shimmering beneath the golden glow of New York's Christmas lights. The streets were alive with holiday cheer, families bundled in scarves and coats, couples laughing beneath strings of twinkling bulbs, children pointing excitedly at shop windows, decorated with snowmen and reindeer. But what happens when a little girl's question sparks a life-changing act of kindness? The black Range Rover pulled up near a quiet bus stop, just a few blocks from the Rockefeller Christmas tree. Michael Carter stepped out first, tall and composed, his dark overcoat brushing against his crisp navy suit. He extended his hand, and a little girl with curls the color of sunlight jumped down into the fresh layer of snow. "Stay close, sweetheart," he said gently, adjusting her white knit hat. "We'll go see the big tree, then head home for Cocoa." "Okay? Okay, Daddy," Kelly beamed, holding his hand tightly. The city felt magical that night. Christmas Eve always did, but Michael's eyes were distant, as if the lights of the season could never quite reach him. It had been 2 years since he lost his wife. And though he tried his best to smile for Kelly, the hole in his chest never fully closed. They walked slowly past the glowing storefronts, Kelly chattering about Santa and how many cookies they should leave by the fireplace. But suddenly she stopped. Her voice fell to a whisper. "Daddy, why is that lady sleeping there?" Michael turned to where Kelly was pointing, the old wooden bench at the edge of the bus stop. There, curled up beneath the flickering bus route sign, was a young woman. She looked barely 20. Her blonde hair was messy, tangled with flakes of snow. She wore a pale, worn-out sweater that barely reached her elbows. In her trembling arms, she held something close to her chest. Michael stepped forward a little, squinting. It was a baby, wrapped in a thin, frayed blanket. The infant lay still, cheeks red from the biting cold, tiny fingers poking out and trembling slightly in the wind. Can one act of compassion rewrite someone's story? Michael's heart tightened. He instinctively reached for Kelly's hand to keep walking. They were just strangers, after all. The city was full of stories you could not fix. But Kelly pulled back. "Daddy," she said again, more firmly this time, eyes wide. "She has a baby. He's so little." "Daddy, he's cold." Michael looked down at his daughter. Her small face was earnest, concern written in every innocent feature. For a moment, he hesitated, his breath visible in the frosty air, mind swirling between logic and emotion. Then something shifted. Without a word, he slowly bent down and began to unwrap the soft red scarf from Kelly's neck. She said nothing, just watched as her father stepped toward the sleeping girl. Kneeling beside the bench, Michael gently laid the scarf over the baby, careful not to startle either of them. The infant stirred slightly, lips moving in his sleep. Michael glanced up at the young woman. Her skin was pale, almost blue around the edges of her lips. Her arms clutched the child tighter, even in unconsciousness, as if instinctively guarding him. He reached out a hand and touched her shoulder lightly. "Miss," he said, voice low but urgent. "Miss, you can't stay out here tonight." She did not respond. Michael leaned closer, concern deepening. His voice broke just slightly. "Please wake up." The wind blew a little harder then, sending a chill through his spine. In the distance, a chorus of carolers could be faintly heard, singing, "Silent Night." And yet nothing about this moment felt silent. He turned back briefly and saw Kelly watching him, not with fear, but hope. And that was all he needed. He turned back to the young woman still kneeling, determination settling into his features. "You're coming with us," he said under his breath, not quite sure who he was trying to convince, her or himself. Grace Miller awoke in a jolt of panic. The cold hit her first, sharp and biting. Then came the fear. Her arms clutched the bundle in her chest, her baby. Her eyes flew open. Snow was falling heavier now. Her back ached from the frozen bench. But what startled her most was the tall man kneeling beside her, the scent of cologne and city air clinging to him. He was dressed in a tailored coat, leather, gloves, and he was holding something in his arms. Her baby. "No!" she gasped, lunging forward. "Give him back!" The man didn't flinch. His voice was steady and low. "He's freezing. You need to come inside." She tried to stand, her legs trembling. "I don't need your pity." Michael Carter studied her. Young, barely 20. Her blonde hair was tangled and crusted with frost. Her lips cracked. Her sweater stretched thin. But it was her eyes that held him. Defiant, desperate, exhausted. The baby stirred weakly. Michael adjusted the scarf, his daughter's scarf, around the infant's small body. The child's skin was pale, his lips tinged blue. "I'm not offering pity," he said. "I'm offering warmth." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked, then back. "People only help when they want something. I've learned that the hard way." A gust of wind cut through them. The baby let out a weak, wheezing cough, then another. Michael stood, holding the baby tighter. "You can come or not, but I'm not leaving him to freeze." For a moment, Grace didn't move. Her arms ached for her son. Every part of her screamed to grab him back, to run. But something in the man's eyes stopped her. They weren't cruel. They weren't suspicious. They were kind, like a father's. She took a hesitant step. "His name is Noah," she whispered. Michael nodded. "I'm Michael. My car's nearby." She glanced at her soaked shoes, then back at her baby, swaddled in a scarf that wasn't his, held by a man she didn't know. But her feet moved. She followed. Inside the Range Rover, the world felt surreal, warm, too quiet. Grace curled up, in the back seat, watching every move as Michael adjusted Noah's blanket. A little girl peeked over the seat, watching her with wide, curious eyes. "She's so young," Grace murmured. "She's 4, Michael replied, catching her gaze in the mirror. "Her name's Kelly," Grace nodded. "She's beautiful." For a moment, silence settled. Then Kelly asked softly, "What's your baby's name?" "Noah," Grace said. Kelly smiled. "He's really tiny, like a snowflake." Michael's eyes flicked to the mirror again. Grace was staring out the window, but he saw the shimmer of tears she wouldn't let fall. Grace had once believed in fairy tales before it all fell apart. She had been a sophomore at a liberal arts college, majoring in fine arts. She loved drawing, people, places, moments in between. Her professors praised her work. Then came the boy, the promises, the mistakes, the test that turned positive. When she told him, he disappeared. When she told her family, strict, religious, unbending, they gave her an ultimatum. "You've brought shame into this house, her," Mother said. "If you keep it, you leave." She left. No job, no money, no support. Just a child she hadn't been ready for, and yet couldn't abandon. She bounced between shelters, then the streets. Food went to Noah. Coats were wrapped around him. Every night was a fight to survive. Christmas Eve was just another night to get through until now. As the car moved smoothly through the snowy streets, Grace broke the silence. "Why did you stop?" Michael didn't answer right away. He thought of Kelly, of that first moment he held her after the accident. The silence that filled the house for 2 years. The weight of grief he couldn't shake. "I guess," he said finally, "someone once told me, if you can help and don't, it's the same as walking away." Grace looked at him. He was the type she usually avoided. Powerful, composed, rich. But there was something else. Not in his suit, not in the car, in his voice. It wasn't belief in her, but belief in doing the right thing. She looked at Noah, now sleeping soundly in the arms of a stranger, wrapped in a child's scarf, breathing easier. For the first time in months, the weight in her chest loosened. She leaned back against the seat, arms still curled on her lap, like she was holding Noah. Michael glanced at her once more in the mirror. He didn't smile, but something in his face softened. And for the first time in 2 years, Christmas Eve felt different. The elevator doors opened to reveal the top floor of one of Manhattan's most exclusive high-rises. Grace had never seen anything like it. Warm light poured across polished hardwood floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sweeping view of the snowy skyline. In the corner stood a towering Christmas tree, glowing with gold and red ornaments. It looked like a scene from a movie. Her breath caught. Michael stepped out, carrying Noah. Kelly skipped ahead, calling, "Come on, this is your room, baby Noah!" She disappeared into a guest room, turning on a soft nightlight shaped like a moon. A small bassinet stood nearby, unused, since Kelly was a baby, but spotless. Grace hovered in the doorway, arms crossed tightly. She didn't step inside. Michael noticed. "You're safe here," he said gently. "Take the room. Rest. We'll talk in the morning." Grace gave a small nod. Once he left, she sat on the edge of the bed, still in her coat. After a moment, she laid Noah in the crib and sat beside him, one hand resting on his chest. It was the first night she didn't sleep with one eye open. The next morning, Grace rose early. She found the laundry room by accident and washed Noah's blanket and her sweater, still smelling faintly of the street. Then in the kitchen, she wiped the spotless counters and made a simple breakfast, eggs and toast. She was rinsing the dishes when Michael walked in, still in his robe. "You're up early," he said, surprised. Grace shrugged lightly. "I work for what I use always." He looked at her for a moment. There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet dignity. "I'll make the coffee," he said. Later that morning, Mrs. Margaret Hill arrived. She had worked for the Carters for over a decade. Practical, sharp, loyal. She immediately noticed the extra dish in the sink, unfamiliar footprints, and the faint scent of baby powder. She found Michael in his study. "Sir," she said quietly, "we have a guest." Michael nodded. "Her name is Grace. She and her baby will be here for a while." Margaret frowned. "You don't know her. What if she's just after your money? It happens, especially to men like you." Michael closed his book. She was sleeping at a bus stop with her infant. "I don't think this is a scam." Margaret hesitated. Even so, kindness should be measured, especially with Kelly in the house. Neither noticed Grace standing in the hallway holding a clean towel. She had heard everything. Without a word, she turned back into the guest room and quietly began packing. She dressed Noah with shaking hands, folding the blanket, pressing it close around him. "Let's go, baby," she whispered, "before we wear out the welcome." She opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. Kelly came running, nearly, knocking her off balance as she wrapped her arms around Grace's legs. "Please don't go," she cried. "Mommy said helping others is the best gift. You and Noah are our gift." Grace froze, then came footsteps. She looked up to see Michael standing at the end of the hallway, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. He had heard everything, Margaret's doubt, Grace's quiet retreat, Kelly's pleading, and in that moment, he was back in a hospital room 2 years ago, holding his wife's hand as she whispered, "Be kind, Michael, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He swallowed, his voice soft. "You're not using us, Grace. You're doing everything but that." She stood still, arms wrapped around her child. Michael stepped forward. "Please stay." The days after Christmas passed gently. wrapped in soft music and firelight, the kind of warmth Grace hadn't known in a long time. She spent her mornings in the sunroom, a quiet space with tall windows and a snow-dusted view of Central Park. Michael had once used it as a reading nook, but it quickly became Grace's studio. In a forgotten corner, she found a box of old art. Supplies, charcoal, sketch pads, brushes. She asked if she could use them. They were my wife's, Michael had said. She used to paint here. Kelly joined Grace each morning, dragging her blanket and hot cocoa, plopping beside her with endless requests. Can you draw a puppy? Can you draw me with wings? Can you draw Daddy with a silly hat? Grace would laugh and sketch, her hands quick and gentle. But one morning, Kelly sat quietly, hands folded, watching Grace without saying a word. Grace didn't ask why. She just started drawing. That night, Michael came home to Kelly running into his arms. Grace made you something, she said proudly, but you can't see it until after dinner. Later, in the sunroom, Grace was tidying up her sketches when Kelly handed Michael a folded piece of paper. He opened it and froze. It was a drawing of him and Kelly beside the Rockefeller Christmas tree. He was kneeling, tying her shoelace, and Kelly looked up at him with a tiny hand on his shoulder. Warm lights surrounded them like a quiet halo. Michael stared at it for a long time. I didn't even know you saw that, he murmured. Grace, standing near the window, said softly, I notice things people forget to see. He looked at her, really. Looked, and something passed between them, silent, honest, unspoken. 2 nights later, over breakfast, Michael looked up from his coffee. There's a charity gala this weekend. Would you go with me? Grace blinked. Me? He gave a small smile. You'd be saving me from a lot of awkward conversations. She hesitated. I don't exactly have a dress for something like that. We can take care of that, he said simply. On the night of the event, Grace wore a deep green dress, simple, elegant, her hair curled loosely around her face. The only jewelry she wore was a small silver pendant that Kelly had begged her to borrow. They stepped into the grand ballroom, and Grace instantly felt every eye on her. She stayed close to the edge of the room, quiet, observing. Michael introduced her to a few people. She smiled politely, nodded where needed, but mostly kept to herself. Later, standing near the dessert table, she held a glass of wine she hadn't touched when a woman's voice cut through the noise. Well, if it isn't the Christmas charity case turned date. Grace turned slowly. The woman was tall, polished, someone clearly from Michael's circle. Her smile was syrupy and sharp. I knew I recognized you, she said. You were the one on 48th and 7th, right? Sleeping on a bench with a baby. Sweet little rags to riches story. Bet it makes for great press. Grace's fingers tightened around her glass, but her face stayed calm. She didn't answer. She simply turned and walked out into the snow. Michael found her minutes later, standing beneath a street lamp as snowflakes gathered in her hair. She didn't turn when he approached. You didn't have to come after me, she said quietly. Yes, I did. He slipped off his coat and wrapped it over her shoulders. You didn't deserve that, he said gently. You never have to explain yourself to anyone. Not anymore. She finally looked at him. Her eyes, so often guarded, were open, soft. And in that moment, Michael wasn't the man who had rescued her. He wasn't a CEO or a millionaire. He was simply someone who saw her, really saw her, and for the first time, she let herself be seen. The late afternoon sun cast a soft golden light across Central Park, where families strolled through the snow-lined paths and children laughed, tossing snowballs beneath bare trees. Grace pushed the stroller slowly, one hand clutching the handle, the other wrapped tightly around her coat. Noah was bundled up and fast asleep, his tiny hat slipping slightly to one side. The soft hum of the city around her felt oddly peaceful until she heard a familiar voice. Grace. Her body went cold before she turned. There, standing just off the path near a bench, was her mother. Same pristine posture, same tailored coat, same eyes, sharp, unreadable. Grace's breath caught in her throat. Her mother took one look at Noah in the stroller, then back at Grace with barely concealed judgment. "You shouldn't be here," her mother said flatly. "Not in public, not like this." Grace said nothing, her jaw tightening. "You chose shame," her mother continued, voice like ice. "So don't expect love." Then, without another word, the woman turned and walked away, heels clicking against the pavement, disappearing into the crowd. Grace stood frozen, not shocked, not surprised, just hollow. That night, the penthouse was quiet, except for the soft crackling of the fireplace. Grace had said little since she returned. She had fed Noah, bathed him, tucked him into bed. Now, she sat silently in the corner of the living room, lost in thought. Michael was upstairs finishing a call, but Kelly was still awake, playing with crayons and paper near the tree. After a few minutes, Grace heard her voice. "Look, Grace." Kelly said proudly. "It's your house." Grace looked over. In Kelly's tiny hands was a drawing she had taken from Grace's sketchbook, a watercolor painting Grace had done days earlier, but never showed anyone. In it, there was a small, cozy home. Warm light glowed from the windows. Snow covered the roof. In front of the house stood 4 figures: Grace, Michael, Kelly, and baby Noah, all holding hands beneath a tall Christmas tree strung with golden lights. Kelly pointed at each figure in turn. "That's me. That's baby Noah. That's Daddy. And that's you." She smiled up at Grace, completely certain. "This is our family now, right?" Grace didn't speak. Her throat burned. Her chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with pain, at least not the kind she was used to. She crossed the room slowly and knelt beside Kelly, pulling her and the drawing into her arms. She held Kelly tightly, her hand shaking as she brushed a kiss across the child's forehead. Then she reached out and pulled Noah's blanket from the stroller nearby, hugging both children close, her heart overflowing. And for the first time, she cried. Not from rejection, not from loneliness, but because in that quiet room filled with warmth and firelight, she finally felt like she belonged. She wasn't alone anymore. A few moments later, Michael stepped into the room. He stopped when he saw her on the floor, holding both children, her shoulders trembling in silence. The painting lay beside her, and the firelight shimmered against the tears on her cheeks. He walked over slowly, crouched down, and rested a hand gently over hers. "You've carried the world on your shoulders," he said softly. "Let someone carry you now." Grace looked up at him, eyes red, cheeks wet, but smiling for the first time through the pain. And in that single moment, something shifted between them. Not pity, not rescue, but recognition of 2 people who had known loss, who had learned to live with it, and who, for the first time in a long time, didn't have to do it alone. The storm rolled in fast that night. Snow swirled outside the penthouse windows, blanketing the city in white silence. Inside, the fireplace flickered warmly, but the peace didn't last. It started with a soft whimper. Grace rushed to the nursery where Noah lay restless, his tiny arms twitching under the blanket. His cheeks were flushed a deep, alarming red, and sweat clung to his hairline. When she touched his forehead, her heart dropped. He was burning up. "Noah," she whispered, lifting him into her arms. His body was hot, too hot. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. "Noah, baby, look at me." Panic set in. She grabbed the thermometer, fumbled it into place. 104.2 degrees. She gasped, pressing him closer to her chest. "Michael!" she shouted, her voice cracking. He appeared in seconds, still buttoning the cuff of his dress shirt. He had been getting ready for a midnight video call, something high stakes with investors in Tokyo. But the look on Grace's face stopped him cold. "He's burning up," she said, her voice shaking. "He won't wake up, Michael. I don't know what to do." Michael took one look at Noah's limp frame and didn't ask another question. 10 minutes later, the Range Rover tore through the snowy streets of Manhattan, tires crunching over slush and ice. Michael's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Grace sat in the back, cradling Noah, whispering his name over and over as if the sound of her voice could anchor him to this world. "Please, baby, please stay with me." Kelly had stayed behind with Margaret. Michael hadn't even bothered to explain the canceled meeting. He had simply tossed his phone aside and said, "Tell them I'm not coming. My family needs me." The hospital waiting room was cold and too bright. The receptionist spoke in hushed tones. A nurse whisked Noah from Grace's arms while another guided them toward a curtained room. Grace followed, dazed, until her knees buckled into the nearest chair. Michael remained standing, watching through the glass pane in the door as the pediatric team hovered over the tiny crib, and then he heard a soft breath beside him. Grace had fallen asleep, her head tilted to the side, dark circles under her eyes. Exhaustion had finally won. Michael turned. He reached into his coat and gently placed it over her shoulders. Then, with the softest touch, he pushed a lock of hair behind her ear. She stirred but did not wake. He knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he whispered. And so is he. He turned back toward the window, staring at the tiny boy now wrapped in medical blankets, an oxygen mask gently placed over his nose. Michael walked into the room, pulled up a stool, and sat beside the crib. The machines beeped steadily. Noah looked even smaller now, his hand barely the size of Michael's thumb. Michael reached out and took the baby's hand in his own. It fit perfectly. He sat like that for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stayed, holding on, as if by sheer presence alone, he could anchor Noah back to health. Not once did he think about the meeting he had missed. Not once did he regret it. Because in that moment, it didn't matter if Noah was his by blood. What mattered was that he was his by choice. Hours passed. The snow outside continued to fall, in thick silence. Grace stirred awake, eyes fluttering open to the sterile lights above her. She looked around in a daze and then spotted them. Michael, asleep now, sitting in the hard plastic chair beside Noah's bed, his head resting against the wall, one arm still draped protectively over the crib. She covered her mouth with one hand, the tears coming fast and quiet. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time since Noah was born, someone had stayed. The days after Noah's fever broke felt like waking from a long, dark dream. He was back to his babbling, smiling self, and Grace barely let him out of her arms. Relief slowly replaced fear. The hospital stay had shaken her, but something deeper had stayed with her. Michael had stayed without question or hesitation. That kind of loyalty was something she had never known. One crisp morning, as the snow outside began to melt into slush, Grace stood in the kitchen making coffee. Her voice was calm but sure. "I should start looking for work." Michael looked up. "You don't have to rush." "I want to," she replied. "I need to earn my way." He nodded, recognizing something in her tone, a quiet strength. Grace didn't survive by depending. She survived by standing. He didn't press further, but something in his mind had already shifted. 2 weeks later, he took her to a small art gallery tucked between shops on the Upper East Side. The sign above the door read, "Miller & Co. Art Studio." She stared. "Miller?" she asked softly. "Just go in," he said, with a small smile. Inside, golden lights bathed the walls. Jazz music played low, and every piece of art hanging inside was hers. Sketches, watercolors, studies of the city and people. And there, under a spotlight, was the painting of Michael tying Kelly's shoelace beneath the Christmas tree. "I don't understand," Grace whispered. "I remembered something you said," Michael replied, "that you didn't just want to paint, you wanted to share what you see. So I bought this place. It's yours." Her voice trembled. "Michael, I can't accept this." "You already did," he said gently. "Every time you picked up a pencil, every time you saw what others missed, people began arriving. Friends, locals, supporters. Champagne glasses clinked. Grace stood near the corner, overwhelmed, her heart racing. Then Michael stepped forward to address the room. The crowd hushed. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "It's not every day we get to witness something as rare as this. Not just talent, but true heart." He turned to Grace. "This is Grace Miller, the artist, the mother, and the woman who reminded me what love really is." The silence that followed was complete. Grace stood still, tears welling. She had never been seen this way, not as someone to fix, not as a charity case, but as someone worthy. Slowly, applause spread across the room, growing louder. Grace felt something rise inside her, break loose from years of being unseen. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain, not from shame, but from recognition and belonging. Later that night, long after the guests had gone, Grace stood in the gallery, alone, gazing at her painting. Michael stepped quietly beside her. "I meant every word," he said. She turned to him, heart full. He stepped closer. "You gave even when you had nothing. You made a home for your son. You reminded me what it means to feel. That's not something people just do." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why me?" He smiled, warm and steady. "Because you never asked to be seen, but you let me see you anyway." And this time, when she leaned into him, it wasn't with fear. It was with love. It was with trust. It was home. The snow fell lightly, like confetti from the clouds, dusting. The trees and hedges of the garden in a gentle shimmer of white. It was Christmas Day, exactly 1 year since that night at the bus stop, and everything had changed. The backyard of the Carter home had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Twinkling lights lined the wooden fence, and a fire pit crackled softly nearby. A long table was set with art supplies, brushes, palettes, paints, and thick paper. Kelly had insisted that this Christmas, instead of gifts, they would all paint memories. So that was what they were doing. Michael sat beside Grace. On the bench, a warm plaid blanket thrown over their laps. Noah, now just over a year old, sat nestled between them, giggling as he smeared blue paint across his little fingers. Kelly stood at the table, tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on drawing a house with 4 stick figures under a Christmas tree, one taller, one with curls, one with a ponytail, and one very small with a big smile. Grace glanced at her daughter's work, a soft laugh slipping from her lips. "You're getting really good, you know." "I learned from the best," Kelly said proudly without even looking up. Grace smiled, her cheeks flushed pink in the winter air, her golden hair catching the last rays of the afternoon sun. The light danced around her, making her look like something out of the very stories she used to only dream about. Michael turned to look at her, and for a moment, he forgot everything else. The business meetings, the losses, the years of loneliness. All he could see was this. Grace, radiant with joy, Noah, safe and warm in his arms, Kelly laughing under the sky. The kind of peace that doesn't come from perfection, but from healing. Then Kelly's voice broke through the quiet. "Daddy." Michael looked up. "Are we a family now?" The question hung in the air for a moment. soft, simple, but echoing so much, more than it seemed. He looked at Grace, at Noah, at the little girl who had asked that question once before, long ago, pointing at a stranger on a bench and unknowingly changing all their lives. He pulled them all closer, Grace against his side, Noah cradled to his chest, Kelly wrapping her arms around them. He smiled, voice steady and full. "Forever, sweetheart. Forever." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the snowy yard, the four of them stayed close, brushes in hand, hearts in sync. There had once been 4 broken pieces, scattered in different places across the city: a grieving man, a lost young woman, a motherless child, and a baby born into uncertainty. But somehow, by grace or fate, or something in between, those pieces had found one another. And now they fit perfectly. Together, they painted a picture of home. Sometimes the most unexpected moments lead us to the people who were meant to change our lives. Michael, Grace, Kelly, and little Noah weren't perfect, but together they found something far more powerful than perfection: belonging, love, and healing. This Christmas, may we all remember that kindness is never wasted, and that sometimes a single act of compassion can build an entire family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Once Upon a Voice, where we bring you true tales and heartwarming fiction that heal, inspire, and remind us what really matters. Until next time, take care and keep your heart open. Subscribe now to Once Upon a Voice for more stories that touch the soul.